What happens when the only voice that protects a village suddenly goes silent? What happens when a tradition that has survived for centuries meets a secret that could destroy it all? And how loud must the silence be before the truth is finally heard? In a valley known for its golden harvest, the sun rose on the day of the great festival, but the air felt heavy and cold. The people gathered to hear the heartbeat of their history, unaware that their leader had traded their future for a bag of silver. This isn't just a story about a broken instrument or a failed festival. It is a story about the weight of a guilty conscience and the integrity required to lead. Before the silence fell, there was David. A loyal son. A gifted musician. The future keeper of the tradition. Welcome to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every truth demands to be heard. Now, before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Is it morning in Lagos, evening in Nairobi, or midnight in London? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now, lean in. Because this isn't just about what happened, it's about what it means. The village of Green Valley lay nestled between two great mountains, a place where the morning mist tasted like sweet yam and the evenings were filled with the laughter of children. For 300 years, the peace of this land had been held together by one sacred object, the great drum of the ancestors. It was not merely wood and animal skin, it was the voice of the past, carved from an ancient mahogany tree that had stood since the beginning of time. Every year, during the harvest festival, the drum would be brought out. It was said that when the drum was played with a pure heart, the rains would be gentle, the crops would be plentiful, and sickness would stay far from the village gates. The people did not just hear the drum, they felt it in their chest, a deep resonance that reminded them they were one family, bound by blood and soil. David stood in the center of the dusty compound, staring at the great drum where it rested on a woven mat. He was a young man of 25, with strong hands and a gentle spirit, the only son of Chief Thomas. For the first time in his life, David felt a strange hesitation as he approached the instrument. Usually, the wood seemed to hum with a warm energy, greeting him like an old friend. But today, the drum looked lifeless. The intricate carvings of lions and eagles seemed to frown, and the stretched skin on top appeared grey and dull. David reached out to touch the rim, expecting the familiar vibration of life, but instead, a sharp coldness shot up his arm. It was as if the spirit within the wood had retreated deep inside, hiding from something unseen. Chief Thomas emerged from the main house, adjusting the heavy, embroidered robes that signaled his authority. In recent months, David had noticed a change in his father. The chief, once a man who walked through the mud with farmers and shared jokes with the market women, had become distant. He spent long hours in the city, returning with strange guests who wore dark suits and spoke in hushed whispers. He had installed new gates around their compound and often snapped at the servants for minor mistakes. As Thomas walked towards the drum, his eyes darted around the compound nervously, checking the shadows as if he expected an intruder. He did not look like a man about to celebrate a festival, he looked like a man guarding a heavy burden. "Is everything ready, my son?" Chief Thomas asked, his voice overly loud in the quiet morning. He clapped a hand on David's shoulder, but the grip was tight, almost painful. "Today must be perfect. Mr. Cole and his partners from the city are coming. They must see our culture. They must see that we are a united people." David looked at his father, noting the beads of sweat forming on the older man's forehead despite the cool breeze. "Father," David said softly, "the drum feels different today. It is cold. It sleeps. Are you sure the spirits are at peace with us?" Thomas stiffened, his smile vanishing instantly. "Do not speak of superstitions," he snapped. "It is just wood and leather, David. You hit it, and it makes a sound. Do your job, and do not embarrass me." That evening, as the sun began to set and paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, a black car with tinted windows rolled into the chief's compound. David watched from behind a curtain as Mr. Cole, a man with a smile that did not reach his eyes, stepped out. He carried a thick leather briefcase. David watched his father greet the stranger with a bow that was too low for a chief. They went into the inner chamber, but the window was slightly open. David crept closer, his heart pounding against his ribs. He heard the click of the briefcase opening. "The papers are signed, Thomas," Mr. Cole's voice drifted out, smooth as oil. "Once the festival is over, the bulldozers will come. The gold under this village is worth more than their yams. You will be a rich man in the city." David froze. The drum wasn't just cold, it was mourning. The land was being sold beneath their feet. The morning of the festival arrived with a brightness that felt like a lie. The villagers of Green Valley poured into the town square, dressed in their finest fabrics of blue, yellow, and red. Women carried baskets of fruit on their heads, swaying to the rhythm of smaller hand drums, while men gathered in groups, sharing palm wine and laughing about the harvest. Yet, for David, the vibrant colors looked washed out, grayed by the terrible secret he carried in his chest. He stood by the great drum, which had been moved to the center of the stage. The sun beat down on the taut skin of the instrument, but it remained stubborn and lifeless. David's hands trembled. How could he play the song of unity when the very ground they danced on had been betrayed? Chief Thomas sat on his high throne, looking majestic in his royal attire, but his foot tapped rhythmically, a nervous stick he couldn't control. Next to him, in a special VIP chair, sat Mr. Cole. The stranger wore dark sunglasses and held a glass of imported wine, looking at the villagers not with respect, but with the calculating gaze of a butcher eyeing cattle. The villagers, unaware of the predator in their midst, cheered as the chief stood up to speak. "My people," Thomas shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Today we celebrate our prosperity. Today we show the world that Green Valley is open for new beginnings." The crowd cheered, interpreting his words as a blessing, but David saw the flinch in his father's jaw. The lie was eating him alive from the inside out. David picked up the heavy wooden beaters. They felt like lead weights in his hands. According to tradition, the festival could not officially begin until the great drum spoke. Its deep, thunderous boom was the signal for the ancestors to join the celebration. The crowd went silent, hundreds of eyes fixing on David. He looked at his father. Chief Thomas's eyes were wide, pleading, desperate. "Play," his eyes screamed. "Cover my sin with noise. Make them dance so they do not see what I have done." David looked at the villagers, his friends, his teachers, the children who ran barefoot in the dust. If he played, he became part of the deception. If he didn't, he shamed his father publicly. He raised the sticks. The silence in the square was so absolute that a falling leaf would have sounded like a crash. David closed his eyes and tried to summon the rhythm that lived in his blood. He swung the stick down with all his might, aiming for the center of the drum where the sound was deepest. The wood connected with the skin. But instead of a boom that shook the earth, there was a dull, flat thud. It sounded like a fist hitting a bag of wet sand. The crowd gasped. A murmur rippled through the square like a sudden wind. David froze. He struck again, harder this time. Thud. The sound was dead. The drum refused to resonate. It swallowed the energy, refusing to amplify a lie. Panic flashed across Chief Thomas's face. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his ceremonial staff. "Harder," he yelled, forgetting his dignity. "Play it harder, boy. The dampness has affected the skin. Strike it." David looked at the drum, then at his father. He realized then that this was not physics, this was judgment. The drum was not broken, it was awake. It knew who sat in the VIP chair. It knew whose pocket held the silver. David dropped the sticks. They clattered onto the wooden stage, the sound shockingly loud. "I cannot," David said, his voice shaking but carrying across the silent square. "The drum will not speak for a sold land. It will not sing for a leader who has lost his way. The silence that followed David's words was heavier than any mountain. It was a silence that demanded truth. Mr. Cole, realizing the mood had shifted dangerously, slowly began to close his briefcase, signaling his bodyguards to move closer. The villagers turned to their chief, confusion turning into suspicion. "Sold land," an elder shouted from the front row. "What does the boy mean, Thomas?" Chief Thomas stood trembling, his fine robe suddenly looking like a costume that didn't fit. He opened his mouth to deny it, to banish his son, to call it madness. But he looked at the great drum. The instrument sat there, silent and accusing, a witness that could not be bribed. Chief Thomas looked at Mr. Cole, then at the terrified faces of his people, and finally at his son. David stood tall, tears streaming down his face, not in anger, but in grief for the father he used to know. Something broke inside the chief. The wall of pride he had built with foreign money crumbled under the weight of the drum's silence. He collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I wanted to build a legacy," he sobbed, his voice small and broken. "He promised wealth. He promised a new city. I thought I was saving us from poverty." He reached into his robe and pulled out the folded contract, throwing it onto the dusty ground. It lay there, a white scar against the red earth. The village priest walked slowly up the stairs of the stage. He picked up the contract, read it once, and tore it in half. The sound of the ripping paper was louder than any drumbeat. He turned to Mr. Cole. "Leave," the priest said calmly. "Your money has no value here. The roots of our trees go deeper than your pockets." Mr. Cole looked at the angry crowd, stood up, and retreated to his car without a word. The engine roared, and the dust swallowed the vehicle as it sped away, taking the corruption with it. The villagers did not cheer. They watched with a solemn dignity. They had come close to losing everything, saved only by the silence of wood and skin. Chief Thomas wept openly now, stripped of his arrogance. He was no longer the powerful chief, he was just a man who had failed. David walked over to him. He did not scold him. He knelt and placed a hand on his father's shaking shoulder. "The land is still here, father," David whispered. "And so are you. But you must earn your way back." Thomas looked up, his eyes red. He took his son's hand and stood up, not as a ruler, but as a penitent man. He turned to the village, bowed low, and asked for forgiveness. It would take years to rebuild the trust, but the work began in that moment. David turned back to the great drum. He picked up the sticks one last time. The air in the square felt different now, lighter, cleaner. He didn't strike the drum hard. He simply tapped it, a gentle, testing rhythm. Doom doom. The sound resonated instantly, rich and warm, vibrating through the wooden stage and into the soles of everyone's feet. The drum had forgiven. The block was gone. As David found the rhythm, the people began to move, not in a wild party, but in a slow, soulful dance of gratitude. The ancestral drum played on into the night, a reminder that while truth may be quiet, it is never silent. David never became the richest man in the region, and his father never wore fine imported suits again. But years later, as David taught his own son to hold the sticks, he knew he possessed something far greater than gold. He had a clear conscience and a village that still belonged to its people. This isn't just a story about a drum. It is a lesson that integrity is the only sound that echoes forever. When you trade your values for profit, even the stones will refuse to speak for you. And a heart that chooses truth over treasure, and people over power, will never lead you wrong. If this story moved you, hit like, share it, and tell me in the comments, what is one tradition or value you would never sell for any amount of money? Subscribe to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every choice carries a lesson. This is Stories by the King, where love wins, and purpose finds its home.